Music of the Soul, Prelude, Chapter 13. Ayla, Malik's deep but lilting voice droned on as he wrote the name of on the long chalkboard that seemed to make up almost the entirety of that wall, his broad back swathed in deep blue cotton robes to the class, his dark hand flowing with a surprising neatness. Not to be mistaken for Allah, the Muslim god of everything, is the ancient female Alusi, or deity of the earth, morality, fertility, and creativity. She is also known as Ani, Ana, Ale, and Ali in various Igbo dialects, so do not be confused if you see those names in a book referencing her. In the Igbo pantheon, she is the most important to Lucy and the highest. In Odinani, she rules over the underworld and holds their deceased ancestors in her womb. Literally translated, her name means ground, further showing her powers over the earth and her status as the ground itself. Her husband is Madioha, the sky deity. Her symbol is the crescent moon. Can anyone tell me what other gods or goddesses use this symbol? Krista, how about you tell me? The sound of her name snapped her head to attention. History had never been an easy subject for her in high school. She found it hard to concentrate, and memorizing names and dates and events was much more difficult than memorizing chemical formulas and elements on the periodic table. She knew Malik had chosen her because she wasn't listening as assiduously as he wanted. Then again, she never could listen as assiduously as he wanted. Krista looked about her, seeking help, though she knew she would not find it. She sat in the front row of long desks meant to see two that were tilted upward for better writing. The benches at each of the desks were hard and worn with years of student bottoms, as were the desks of years of student hands and papers. Whatever books the students needed for their classes were kept in the classroom and passed out as needed. Here they were kept on a bookshelf at the back of the room that reached from floor to ceiling, each shelf having a precise line of copies of the same book, and each shelf held a different book. Because there were so many books, the wall could not be seen, but instead the bookshelf itself seemed to be the wall. The wall to her right was all windows at waist height, with more bookshelves just below the windows, and a wall to her left was plain white, without so much as a clock to tell time. Next to her, unfortunately, sat Sandra, the sunlight from the window glistening off her blonde hair. She had a vicious, self-satisfied smile on her face as she caught Krista looking around the room for help she would not receive. "What's the matter?" Malik cooed viciously. "Cat got your tongue? You can tell me. What other gods or goddesses use the crescent moon?" "I don't know," she said quietly. She truly hated being put on the spot like that. She could feel her face warming in embarrassment. "You don't know?" Malik roared. "You haven't been listening, have you? I will see you after class. Can anyone else tell me what gods or goddesses also use the crescent moon?" Sandra's hand shot up in the air, her sadistic grin becoming triumphant as Malik pointed at her, giving her permission to speak. "The crescent is attributed to any kind of deity of the moon," she said, sounding very much like anyone should know that, inside their society or not. "The first that comes to mind is Selene, the Greek goddess of the moon. In Roman mythology, she is known as Luna and had 2 daughters from Zeus and 50 to Endymion." "At least someone has been listening properly," Malik said dryly. "Thank you, Sandra. Yes, deities of the moon in many cultures use the crescent as a symbol. Now, Ayla is involved in judging human actions and Igbo law, which they call omenala. Taboos and crimes among their communities that are against the standard of Ayla are called nsoala. If one commits a taboo against the community, it is said that they desecrated Ayla, and the taboo was committed on her earth. Thus, everyone in the community must respect Ayla, as everyone lives on Ayla. Additionally, in contrast to other faiths, mostly Christian and Roman Catholic, it isn't just cemeteries or churches that are considered holy land. As Ayla is considered holy and the goddess of the ground, so is all ground holy. She is also credited with the productivity of the land, which incorporates also human reproductivity. You will see a picture of her on page 294 of your text. You will spend the rest of the class reading this chapter and writing a brief essay on Ayla and Igbo culture. I want at least 2 pages. Even without the lecture, perhaps in part because the lecture part was done, Krista had difficulty concentrating on the chapter. Theology was just as dry and boring as history, though she saw some connection between this Ayla and other goddesses she'd heard of. Granted, her education in anything outside of Christianity was greatly lacking, particularly compared to the rest of the students who were brought up in their pagan religion. But she still knew a bit more than perhaps her pastor growing up would have liked. That suited her just fine, though. She had never liked that pastor and had given up her faith in the Christian God years ago. If anything, giving up her faith had broadened her mindset, leaving her more open-minded than she had been before. There were things she still did not accept about the world, about outside society, about even this society, but she found herself more flexible than she had been and regretted the inflexibility she'd had before. The reading itself was easy enough, but holding on to what she was reading was the difficulty for her. She found herself glancing at her text more often than she would like as she worked through her essay, which was difficult to do mostly because she couldn't think of enough to fill 2 pages with. There was little in the book about Igbo culture because the book was on African theology, not culture. She found herself talking about links to other goddesses under different names to this Ayla just to take up paper. At the end of what felt like forever, the tall bell that stood in the courtyard that connected the 4 education buildings pealed the hour, marking the end of class. Since simplicity in lifestyle was so heavily emphasized, there wasn't a clock around, and only those who were particularly particular about time and were not the timekeeper themselves wore a wristwatch. The timekeeper was one of few on staff that was not a special soul and marked every hour with the ringing of the bell. The only reason there was a bell at all was for class schedules and cafeteria schedules. Otherwise, focusing on the human construct of time was yet another distraction from inner call, one that caused anxiety and impatience, or a distraction from one's own commune with their chosen deity. Krista didn't really believe in all this pagan stuff, but it was part of her education that she had to follow well in training, so she made the effort to learn anyway. Everyone pass your essays forward to the front row and I will collect them there, Malik told them as students shuffled their papers together and stood to put their books away in preparation for the next class. Sandra stuffed her 4 pages into Krista's hands, careful not to touch her skin as though Krista had a disease that was catching, as the students behind her dropped a stack of papers on the desk before her. Such was the way with each class that required a book or paper, though in some of those classes the students were more circumspect with their disgust. Krista added her own essay with Sandra's with the pile before her and carefully tapped them together to make a neat pile in her hands. As she handed the pile to Malik, he took one glance at her essay and tossed it into the small waste paper bin that was by the door. But, she began to argue, but Malik cut her off with a dark glare. You've not been listening to my lectures. Whatever you just wrote is clearly plagiarized from the book or complete drivel. You get no marks for your classwork. Go submit yourself to Camille for inattention in class, not turning in your work, and not even doing your work, he demanded impatiently. But, she tried to argue again, she had done her work. He'd thrown it away with barely a glance at the first page. He hadn't even bothered reading it. But he cut her off again with a sharp gesture. You can add arguing with an instructor to that list. Go, before I add more, he said with a shooing motion before turning to clear the blackboard, already done with her presence. Krista left the room, sagging her shoulders. If she hurried, she could get it over with before her next class. She would have to run, which was against the rules, but she supposed that breaking a tiny rule like that wouldn't be any worse than being late for class. There goes the new girl, she could hear a sneering female voice from the hall behind her, intentionally just loud enough for her to hear. I hear she gets sent to Camille daily, said a different, still snarky female voice with the first one. I guess she's too stupid to follow the rules, even simple ones. Poor little simpleton, the first voice said with a nasty laugh. Perhaps they should send her back to the first grade general education and keep her there until she learns enough to move to the second grade, the second replied nastily. If they did that, she would never leave the first grade, the first said, now laughing fit to wet herself. Krista shrugged her shoulders and tried to ignore them, but it was difficult. She knew she wasn't stupid. At least, she was fairly sure she wasn't stupid. In high school, she had received an A in every class but math, where she only managed a B. She had graduated high school with a 3.72 GPA. Not perfect, but not trifling either. And from what she had heard, their general education classes were the equivalent of kindergarten through senior year of high school. Having Sandra do 4 pages to her scant 2, though, did nothing to bolster her spirits, even though Sandra was top of the class anyway. Run, little outsider, or you'll be late to class, the second voice sneered at her from behind. Oh, wait, I forgot. You can't run. You're too fat. I guess you'll be late after all. Might as well add that to whatever Malik sent you with. Hot tears stung Crystal's eyes as she blinked hard, holding her breath to keep them from falling down her face as she walked quickly down the hall. She would not run in front of her 2 taunters, not when doing so let them know they had gotten to her. But a quick walk wouldn't hurt anything. Tears filled her eyes as she walked, blinding her, so she did not see Hachiro around the corner and ran into him. Sorry, she gasped, not looking up from the floor. Sorry, I didn't mean to. It's okay, Hachiro's voice cut her off impatiently, before lowering his voice. My father got the package, by the way. He sends his thanks. Hachiro referred to 2 things, really, but mentioned only one, the one less dangerous to them at the moment. She had found out that Yuto, Hachiro's father, was deathly afraid of cats. So she had found a stray cat or 3 wandering in the gardens. She'd always had a way with cats and loved them, and had left them in his office while he was away for lunch. While there was nothing to connect her to those cats, many students did not like Yuto for being too strict. Krista had still been beaten for the childish prank because she was an outsider, the one to be blamed for everything. Ileana, too, had received punishment since she was a known prankster, but hers was not as bad because she was not quite an outsider. The other thing was not a package for Yuto, but for Hachiro. Before she could pull her thoughts together or reply, Hachiro continued down the hall in the direction that she had come from, towards the girls who had been taunting her. Krista could not quite hear what he said to them as she continued down the hall, but later that day she found them quiet and sullen, and while they looked at her with hatred and disgust, they kept their opinions to themselves. Yo, Hachiro said, surprising Krista as he sat down in front of her on the long, lonely table at the back of the cafeteria. Usually, Ileana was the only person to sit with her during meals, as she did so right now, surprise as evident on her face as it must have been on Krista's. Hachiro, what brings you to our table of outcasts? Ileana asked with her thick, rolling accent. My father has basically disowned me since I can't outmatch a certain outsider over here, so I figure there's no point in trying to look perfect for him, he said, very much as though it was of no consequence to him what would happen to his squeaky clean image if he was seen dining with the 2 biggest outcasts in their society. To punctuate the point, or perhaps how little it bothered him, he dove into his vegetable stew, chewing slowly and intentionally. I have a name, you know, Krista said impatiently. She was getting tired of everyone calling her outsider as though it was her name. Sorry, Krista. Anyway, fair is fair. You gave me a gift, so I have one for you, he told her as he withdrew a piece of paper folded neatly into a small snake from his broad brown sleeve. Krista took it in her hands and examined it in awe. She didn't know paper could be folded into such small, intricate, interlinking sections to move much the way a snake would move. It even had a short length of narrow ribbon with a notch cut in the end to resemble a forked tongue of a snake, coming from the head. Along the segmented back in small, neat letters read, Open me. Not here, he hissed as she began to pick at the head of the snake, trying to open it. Wait until you have free time alone. Just play with it like it's a gift. That way no one will think it's anything more than that. What about you? She asked, her eyebrows climbing to her hairline. What do you mean? He demanded. What do you think everyone else is going to think if they see you eating with me and giving me gifts? She asked. Both Ileana and Hachiro blinked at her in surprise. Come on, guys, I'm not stupid. Everyone looks up to him as an example. They're going to start asking questions when they see us eating together and exchanging gifts all of a sudden. That's a good point, Ileana mused. I hadn't thought of that. That's why you always get caught, Ileana. You don't think ahead, he said simply, causing her friend to glare at him. He's not wrong, she told her fiery friend. Not you, too. You're supposed to be on my side, Ileana growled at her. Can't argue with the truth, Krista said, trying to duck as Ileana made a swing at the back of her head. She hadn't been fast enough. Anyway, Hachiro said finally, cutting off further protest from Ileana. I don't care anymore what anyone here thinks of me. I've been the center of attention for too long, and all my hard work meant nothing in the end. If people want to associate me with a couple of troublemakers, one of them a dreaded outsider, let them. Aren't you afraid of the repercussions? Krista asked as she took a bite of her crusty roll. There was no butter to put on it, but there was a dish of roasted garlic, a food she could not get enough of, that was soft enough to spread like butter and tasted better anyway. Nope, Hachiro said with a bite of his own roll, which he had split in two and stuffed with a roasted bell pepper and fennel. People can do what they like. I'm done caring. I don't think anyone would bully you anyway, no matter who you associate with, Ileana said, trying to sound nonchalant, but Krista was beginning to recognize that tone and expression. She had a secret she wanted to tell. Knowing her friend, it wasn't much of a secret. You're right about that, for once, Hachiro said as he adjusted his thick glasses and gave a sly grin that made him look almost evil. Don't start with me, Hachiro, Ileana began, but Krista cut her off. Why wouldn't people bully you for being around me? They bully Ileana. Well, they bully me anyway because I'm a troublemaker, Ileana told her sagely, and because I'm only a first-generation insider. My parents came here a couple of years before I was born. They aren't treated as badly as you because they have adapted and act like they've been here 3 generations. I'm the black sheep that doesn't follow the rules. They won't bully him, though, partly because of who his father is, and partly because he himself is very cunning. No one can pin anything on him or even suspects anything of him other than stellar behavior and top grades. You make it sound like I'm up to no good, Hachiro said with suspicion. That's precisely it. Someone who is so squeaky clean has to be up to something, even if there's no proof, Ileana responded with a knowing, almost victorious smile, as though she had finally gotten the upper hand. Makes sense, Krista said thoughtfully as she chewed on her roll. It wasn't Sandra that tripped me up that day in class, but because everyone decided to embrace their power to hide it, no one is to say it wasn't her, except me. You never told me this, Ileana exclaimed. I had no evidence. I still don't, except that Sandra had been standing to my right, and whoever it was that tripped me came from my left. I don't have any friends in that class, so it could have been anyone to my left, Krista reasoned. For some reason, Hachiro sat staring at her silently for a moment. He actually looked surprised that she had reasoned that much out and that she had not told anyone. Why he should be surprised, though, was beyond her. And you didn't say anything to anyone? You just let Sandra take the blame? He questioned. Again, no evidence. If she wanted to take the blame, who was I to stop her? She's one of my biggest bullies anyway. Why is this surprising? She asked. You're usually more honest than that, Ileana told her, looking equally surprised and suspicious of her. What would you do if you found out who had done that? Hachiro asked her slowly, his chewing more of a show of trying to be calm and nonchalant than to actually eat. I don't know, Krista mused aloud. I guess it depends on who they are. I may not have friends in that class, but not everyone is a bully either. Some just plain ignore me. They don't stop the bullies, but they don't take part either. If it was a bully, he continued slowly, well, I don't know if anyone would really do anything about it. Neil-sensei already punished the whole class for it, and I already keep an eye out for them anyway, Krista told him, not really sure why he was asking and not really caring why either. If it isn't a bully, probably ask them why they did that and wonder what other ways they bullied me without knowing it was them. That's it, Ileana said. You wouldn't try to get them back? If I did that for one bully, I'd have to do that for all of them, and doing that for one is bad enough. You know how the teachers are. All they have to do is mention that I retaliated, and I'd be sent to Camille for another beating. Though, come to think of it, she's relented on that of it. She only beats me if that is the actual punishment for the crime. Otherwise, she just has me do chores, or fast for a time, or meditate. Anyway, it isn't worth my time or energy to do to others what has been done to me. Both Ileana and Hachiro sat silently, staring at her in surprise, as though she had suddenly declared that the sky was green and the grass was blue. Hachiro even put down his forkful of roasted vegetables he had been about to eat. What? She asked curiously. Did I say something wrong? Our whole lives we were told that all outsiders were cruel and petty and greedy, Ileana explained after another moment of silence, as though to gather her thoughts. That whatever we do to them, they would return on us tenfold, if it was something bad. If it was something good, they would expect it as no more than what was owed to them, and that's when they don't see it as less than what is owed to them. You're not like that. You do realize that you've just tossed everything we've known about outsiders our whole lives onto its head, don't you? Well, maybe you were taught wrong, Krista said simply, around a mouthful of roasted vegetables. They really were good, seasoned with herbs and salt and pepper, but she did miss having meat and dairy products. Everyone is different, no matter where you go or where you live. True, some people are cruel and petty and all that, but some people are also very kind and compassionate and giving. It just depends on the person. I guess so, Hachiro said quietly. What you must think of us, after all we've put you through since you came here, Ileana said, quite equally quiet. Oh, about the same as out there. A lot of assholes, but there's a few good people that make it worthwhile. You two, for example. You've been my friend since I got here for some reason, Ileana. While you've otherwise ignored me much of the time, you did give me that warning, Hachiro, and today you sat with me at lunch. Neil, too. He's the one teacher who's fair with me and doesn't send me off to Camille, she explained. Ileana and Hachiro continued to gape at her, this time not even trying to hide their amazement. Come on, guys, is it really so surprising to think like that? She said, half joking, if only to get them to stop staring at her like that. It was unsettling. Neither of them responded, however. For so long it has been us versus them, Hachiro mused finally, after several moments of silence. For good reason, considering what has happened in the past. Maybe it's time we update the way we do things. Are you feeling okay, Hachiro? Ileana said, reaching across the table to feel at his forehead, but he pulled back just out of her reach. You're the last person I would expect to want to change things around here. Well, you and everyone else that is more than first generation. Even some of the first generation, few as we are, think that the way we do things now is the way things should be done everywhere. I assure you I feel fine, Hachiro said impatiently. Anyway, change won't come easily, particularly not to the older generations, but it should be done. The world seems to be passing us by. All right, who are you and what have you done with Hachiro? Ileana said, only half joking. Is it really so hard to believe I'm not as iconoclast as everyone else? Hachiro huffed. Yes, Krista and Ileana chorused. Well, I guess you do have a point, but that doesn't mean I'm incapable of change. Anyway, the lunch hour is almost up. We can discuss this stuff later, he told them as he set to his roasted vegetables. Krista looked out one of the many windows set into the back wall of the cafeteria and realized that the sun was just past its zenith, meaning the bell ending the lunch hour would ring soon. If she didn't hurry, she'd be late for her meditation hour, and she already had chores assigned to her today. She didn't need any more punishments today, so she began shoveling vegetables into her mouth, flushing at the unseemly appearance she knew she must be giving. Embarrassment was bad enough, but it was better than being late to another class.